Now we're moving quite appropriate. We're in the vineyard here. We're going to hear a little bit about what's happening in the wine industry. And we're very lucky to have Tyson Lewis, who spent his whole career with vineyards, started working at Mosswood in Margaret River, did his viticulture course at Charles Sturge University, worked with Red Hill Estate, Cheviot Bridge, and about 7 or 8 years ago set up his own business, Peninsula Vine Care. So Tyson's actually very involved at both the local level but at the national level, and he's going to actually share with us today what's happening across that whole sphere within within wines. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank what is Tux Now and Montalto for having me here and having all yourselves here. You come to the fun part now. You're about to all receive a glass of wine from Montalto. You can sit back and relax. No, just kidding. Sorry. You don't like me now, do you? No, I'd just like to thank Montalto, and I'll go from the bottom up. John Mitchell, the owner, the winemaker, Simon Black, Anthony, the general manager, and of course right at the top of the pile is Dan Pryor, the vineyard manager. To thank them all for having us here. I like to bring agriculture to the top when I get the opportunity. But yeah, I'm very lucky to have this space given to us for this day. There's not much in it for Montalto and Tux Now to put this on. It's really through their goodwill in such a great presentation that this is. So Mornington Peninsula Wine is a small region, which I'll run you through the detail of that shortly. For myself, as was detailed, I've worked down here for most of my working life and been involved in seeing what has been substantial change in the ethos and the way we go about what we do here and the real stewardship of the land. And what I'll try to do today is show you the interest in that and the difficulty in that, where there's that change to being foremost in your mind, looking at neutrality of carbon, looking at the way you leave the land better than it was, and the challenges that are in that in a very practical sense. From that we'll move to a regional sense, how the region is trying to do things, and then in a national sense. So really a look at the industry from the close vineyard operation side of things on the way up. My business touches a lot of different vineyards on the Mornington Peninsula, and everyone has a slightly different way of looking at the issues that they're confronted with when it comes to producing fruit to try and produce high quality wine, and doing it in a sensitive manner for the environment. So the peninsula itself, about 250 vineyards in the region of, still growing with vineyards going in every year in a small way. More than 30 wineries, and when I say 30 wineries, commercial wineries that produce wine of a substantial amount. There are little smaller pocketed ones. 60 plus cellar doors. We're a very highly interactive region. We're very close to Melbourne as opposed to some of the other regions in Australia. And they're not so close to the capital cities or the large towns, so we're very lucky in that sense. Most of our produce walks out of the doors like this one you're in today. We do go internationally and interstate, but we're very reliant on the space we have and very cognizant of the fact that people come to our space to see the beautiful Mornington Peninsula. If we don't look after what we've got, people aren't going to come here. In the region we have Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, low volume, high input. That's why your Pinot Noir, when you grab it, unfortunately, it's $30 and up pretty much when you look at it on the shelf from the Mornington Peninsula. When we're with those high inputs come challenges. Those challenges are based around high labour, high tractor movement, high rainfall, which creates high vigour, and also lots of disease pressure. We have about 8 hours of cloud cover per day on average on the Mornington Peninsula. So we're a very temperate region that's prone to disease. So As you saw in the previous slide, we do have to get out there with our tractors and protect that. And there's many different modes. So what I'm going to do is run through some very localised issues reasonably quickly. It's pretty much a slide presentation with some visuals that I'll just talk to that give you some issues that we deal with in different ways. The same issue, but different ways of coming across it in the context of trying to have the least input as far as tractor movement, carbon emission, to get the result you want. We've got a European and South American derived plant in an Australian environment, trying to grow a produce for you into a secondary industry, being an industrial sector winery, going to a tertiary industry, which is your cellador. So there's challenges through every point in that process for us to come out the other end, put a bottle on your table and say, we're carbon neutral. Right at the end of the presentation, you'll see on a national level what we're trying to do to bring some numbers and some pathway for producers to find their way through the different questions they have in their inputs and how they can be tracked as emissions and neutral or otherwise. So management under and around your vines is a big issue down here on the Mornington Peninsula because we have a lot of rainfall, we have a lot of growth in and around the vines. The vines are a row crop that requires to not be challenged too much by its environment around it, otherwise the vines are compromised, the fruit's compromised, the viability of the block or the vineyard is compromised. So what are the options in that undervine area? Herbicides are traditional or have been used and are very effective, but have their pitfalls, of course. The positives are relatively cheap. Uniform aesthetics, can cover ground quickly, relatively low fuel and energy input, and a light footprint. You can go across with a bike or a small vehicle through the vineyard rather than a tractor to get a herbicide done. Negatives, of course, are long-term reduction in bioactivity of a soil that's left open from a herbicide, hard cap on the topsoil, reducing aeration and water penetration, can only be performed in low winds, and potential vine damage if misused. I'm going to rattle through these pretty quickly because there are lots of options here other than just herbicides. So bear with me and we've got time for questions later obviously, but undervine mowing. Something that's traditionally been used a lot in orchards as well, to just undervine mow and continuously undervine mow. No chemicals, stable and healthy, undervine a horizon because you've got root systems in the whole A horizon of your soil. No bare or hard top soil, good wheel traction, neat appearance if you're mowing, operates in any weather condition other than obviously very boggy wet conditions, and faster than any cultivation option you might have, which you'll see in a moment. Negatives, 24/7 competition with the vines. Okay, you've got other root systems there around the vines that are challenging them for their water and nutrient. Tufts of weeds around the trunks, very difficult to deal with those in any mowing situation. The vines are anywhere between 750 to 1,500 millimetres apart, so 1.5 metres between each vine. You can imagine mowing around each one is a difficult task. Large number of passes in a wet year like this year to keep that weed competition down. Possible damage to trunks and vines because you're mowing around them, it's a possibility to hit them. More difficult to operate in steep dell vineyards, usually slower than herbicide, and a permanent undervine grass competes with the vines, as I said before. This is another model of that, which is like a big whippersnipper on either side with a mower in the middle. There's lots of different options to do that undervine mowing or twisting, as they call it in that instance. Cultivation, a couple of different options for cultivation here that you can see. I know these are a bit grainy, these pictures, but that one's a heavily engineered option. Much lighter one here with a knife and a disc. Another one by Pelonk here that has like finger weeders on it that rotate. Positives for these are no chemical use, obviously. Breaking up hard soils, operates in any weather conditions other than really boggy. Looks great with multiple passes, if that's what you like. Negatives, it's relatively slow. You can't do any sort of cultivation at any high speed without getting a good result. Disturbs your soil structure is the big negative. You're obviously turning your A horizon either upside down or spooning it sideways. Sorry, is that me? If I just flip forward a million. There you go, you've seen my whole presentation. So the negatives, you can damage vines also with that cultivation, can encourage broadleaf seeding, so you're turning soil over, things like blackberry, latent seeds come up from turning that soil over. High rainfall means you've got lots of passes, you've got to come back again because you're getting a lot of challenging weeds that are coming up. It can be difficult in certain soils if you've got harder soils or if you've got sands. And uses heavier machinery and more fuel than something like herbicide. Steam is another option. No one's ever really got this one right. Very, very slow speeds, but non-traditional chemical is out of the equation here, although it is of sorts, it's a manipulation of water. No residual in the soil, operates in most weather conditions and can achieve very good control on problem weeds. The negatives, difficult to generate and maintain sufficient heat. You can imagine trying to steam kill a weed. You need to have a high temperature to do that. And there's a high energy input in trying to do that. Obviously, you're trying to keep something hot, you know, you're using a lot of energy besides the tractor energy. And there's a fire risk too. There's a gas flame option rather than steam, which I wouldn't recommend if you've got dripper line. It's not going to work for you, but I have seen that one tried. But this is just an illustration of the variables that we're confronted with other than herbicide and the pitfalls. Mulching slash composting. You'll see a presentation coming up after this one from Joe Vaughan, who's done a lot of mulching in this region, along with Western Port Catchment, by the way, who we started a program with through our association. Obviously, I've got trigger finger today. The positives are possible to have a really good weed control, depending on how often you apply. Moisture retention in the soil, real positive. Topsoil cooling and microbial nutrient input. We all, you know, in various modes of agriculture can see the benefits of mulching, and they're obvious. The negatives are in a line cropping situation like the one you can see behind you. It's a massive input to go and get enough mulch to mulch undervine every acre of your vineyard. The growth of weeds in the mulch that breaks down, you can get exotics in there. So there's provenance issues there. It can be excessive nutrient loads. You've got to get your mulch right or your compost. Finding something from another site and just throwing it onto your vineyard without understanding what it is can have grave issues for you. Bacterially, biologically, you can have plastics in some of the mulches that are delivered to you. You can bring in exotic weeds. You can bring in native weeds that will dominate by using a mulch that's not cured properly. So there's a lot of things to consider in mulching, but if you get it right, and particularly if you have the time and space to mulch or compost on your own property, the benefits are fantastic, which you'll see from the next video presentation from Joe Vaughan. which I'll leave any more detail on mulching to that. So that's just one example of one of the inputs, looking at the undervine in vineyards that I've gone through there, and you can see the multiples of positives in each of those inputs and the multiples of negatives. There was comment from one of the presenters today that there's no straight lines in agriculture, there's no straight decisions, and I thought it was really smart comment about agriculture. For each property, for each region, for each agricultural pursuit, there's a different reason to go a different way. Then on top of that, you look at the calculation and the implication for carbon inputs and emissions. They're the new implication in the last 10 years that send you in some of those directions. So that's one input. I'll keep moving now because we'll move to a regional and more national movement shortly. Sward mulching is the other one, okay? So you look in between the rows. There's a sward there, it's a grass that you can quite easily push sideways and turn into a mulch. Doesn't last long for you, but it's a resource that's underused in a lot of vineyards, where you let that grow to this time of the year when you've got a ryegrass that's about to seed and stop its growth this time of year, throw it sideways and you get a positive mulch. So the timing's important there. The sward crop's got to be maintained. There's only temporary suppression. Mid-row cropping, something that we started to do a lot more with. It's something that's done a lot over viticulture, particularly in the early days of viticulture. South Australia, they're still doing a lot of it. And it's associated with tillage. And people say, oh, well, you're turning your topsoil over. You can do mid-row cropping with minimum or no tillage and get a lot of benefit out of it. The tool that we're using down here at the moment is a narrow, low or no tillage unit that has a very sharp disc in the front of it that will throw your seed into a native or a ryegrass sward, and you can grow a crop down your mid-row without tilling the soil. Yes, the result isn't quite as effective as tilling your soil before you throw down a seed, but that's a choice, getting an absolutely more effective seed or not. So here's an example of an oats that's grown in the winter down here that you can see has gone through 2 progressions of growth. That's midway through its growth pattern. It'll get up to around hip height before you harvest it. There's a couple options in harvesting it. The benefits are nutrient and soil structure, undervine mulching, biodiversity, broadleaf suppression. Timing's crucial for the seeding, and you need to work your pruning into that structure if you're winter cropping. Tractor passes, undervine treatments and harvest dispersal are all things to consider how you're going to grow that crop in the mid-row. Crop rolling, so that crop, you might not throw it sideways as a mulch, you might crop roll it. And crop rolling it, then you may find that you would rather see it break down really slowly, and the carbon sequestration and the bacterial involvement there is really good because there's a slow breakdown of that crop that's been rolled. So you're improving the whole soil structure across your vineyard rather than just protecting your undervine area. This is an example of an undervine crop as well, as opposed to weeding. That's a winter undervine crop, which has been done in South Australia. Unfortunately, it's not something that goes too well down this way, that particular I think it's a medic, possibly. Someone might know, but it's done really effectively in South Australia. We've also done some work with insectariums around the borders of our vineyards to try and diversify in the vineyards, which we've done really successfully in a couple of sites with Karen and the catchment, and other people are continuing with those. I'm rifling through this because I'm running out of time. And also down your mid-row, you can diversify really heavily and get a lot of microorganisms and insects that are beneficial to your vineyard if you put the right crop right through the middle of your row area. Cropping to regen soil. This is a site that was for a new vineyard. It was a paddock that was worn by cattle over the years. So we threw a mustard weed into it. We call it a mustard weed because it takes off like a weed, but it's basically a brassica, and that's in after 3 weeks, thrown down a root like that, which has broken the soil up without having to turn your soil upside down. So regenning by putting through a plant that will do the work of a disc for you. That's up around, almost around my head height, with thousands of yellow butterflies, and it's an amazing looking paddock when it gets up that high. And all that carbon goes back into the soil after it's been, we also put a clover crop through the bottom of it, so really useful way of regenerating a paddock. And I know through different agriculture, there's a lot of that being done, where you rest a paddock basically and put something into it, get the life back in. That we found that mustard weed fantastic for doing that, and a really natural way of not having to put any vehicles in there. Diverse soils on the Mornington Peninsula. We've done a lot of work with our soils and also gone into rootstock trials, where we're doing a lot of rootstock trials. I'm going to run right through this quickly, so apologies, we're running out of time. Where we're looking at different rootstocks and different levels of growth in the rootstocks. The way they take up water, the way they work in the environment for us is really important for us, minimising our inputs if we're getting the right rootstock on the base of the vine, as well as protecting against phylloxera, which some of you might know about. Getting a lot of data out of a project that we're going through at the moment. It's intended to be a long-term project. Also looking at data in our waterways. Very involved in using reuse water through the northern period of the peninsula, which goes out to Gunnamatta. This is a reuse water pipeline from Melbourne Water that's taken off by South East Water. We're reusing water from there, about 300 or 400 acres in the northern area, and trying to get more, but it's very cost prohibitive. And there's also a hinterland scheme for water to be taken up into the hinterland as well that's currently underway, that Steve Marshall, who's here, will tell you lots about if you're interested. So looking at our waterways as well, we've got a project looking at the invertebrates and little creepy crawlies across 12 different waterways in our area. There's also, it'll be put up online, there's a video that you can watch that tells you all about that. We've got 7 weather stations that are privately funded that look at all our weather on the Mornington Peninsula as well. Those weather stations log every 15 minutes all of your regular outlooks for weather. So we've got some really significant differential data on the peninsula. All these things are trying to tell us what should we do in the context of what are we doing well, what are we not doing well. And this is an example of the data we're getting out of different years and different spans of temperature in the region. Very quickly, the other thing that we're doing is trying to be as off-grid as we can across some of the wineries. A good case study is Stonia Winery. They pull all the water off their roofs, and 100% rainwater use in their winery. They don't use anything trucked in. They use carbon filtration. They get around 750 mils of rain. That's captured in a 500 to 600 tonne winery. They're using about 600 to 700,000 kilolitres, including their cellar door, and that's all captured off their roof. They don't have to use any other water. It's a fantastic setup they have. All of their water then that's wastewater is transferred through a number of different stations and moves back out into their gardens under a network. So everything is on site. All of their marc from their winery is converted, about 600 tonnes of fruit is converted to about 160 tonnes of grape marc, goes straight back onto the vineyard. So everything on site stays on site at Stonia. Solar, they use about 40% of the solar that they grab, and the rest goes back into the grid. So that's pretty amazing as well. So their power bill is low. Carbon emission engines. In the EU, more and more are becoming mandatory. I don't understand why our government doesn't make it mandatory here. We're actually uptaking the carbon emissions because we have subsidies with our government and because they're available because the EU make them. If the EU weren't mandatory, they wouldn't make them. We wouldn't have a subsidy because we wouldn't have those engines available to us, but they are low carbon emission engines that we should have in all our tractors, not just some of them. Sustainable Wine Australia, which I need to just go through very quickly for you, is a Wine Growing Australia initiative, which is a program that has 800 members already, 48,000 hectares and 800,000 tonnes of crush. And this is the program for us that we need to get everyone on board with, that shows data, workbooks, goes through certification of every input that you have in your vineyard systematically, all those different areas within your production, and gives you energy inputs and outputs. There's a fair bit of work to get started in it, but there's already a lot of uptake because there's really useful benchmarking against everyone else that gives you an understanding of where you're going with your carbon. That's run by a national body in viticulture, and you can see all those inputs will give you a register of where you're sitting in relation to the national body's need for neutrality in carbon. Australian Grape and Wine also are looking to try and get to 2035 zero emission at Scope 1, which is all your inputs. So very high ideals to have everyone on a balance of Scope 1 zero emissions. So that was pretty rushed, unfortunately, but if anyone needs to talk more about what I've flown through there, I'm very happy for you to come and talk to me about the national initiatives that are there, because I think they're very important.
Pretty exciting. So lots of information there, what's happening at the local level, pretty exciting at the national level. We're going to have time for questions at the end with the panel. Yep. So thanks very much, Tyson. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.